The Jets receive awful news on Mekhi Becton. The right tackle is out for the year with a knee injury. What does this mean for the Jets? What does this mean for Becton? We'll discuss all this and more on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, August 9th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangreneNation.com. On this melancholy day for Jets fans, I thank you for making this show your first listen or your first watch, not only this day, but every day. If you enjoy the show, hit that subscribe button. You'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give the episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Well, I don't think any Jets fans are giving today a thumbs up, however, as the team received news on Mekhi Becton. We spoke extensively on yesterday's show about Mekhi Becton's injury. He limped off the field during Monday's practice. The Jets indicated that he had a knee injury. The preliminary tests suggested that maybe it was not going to be so serious. However, as we got into Monday night, they did more extensive testing. And by all accounts, I mean, it was national media, it was local media. Everybody was saying that the Jets were very pessimistic after the more extensive testing took place on Monday night. And then news broke during Jets practice, or near the end of Jets practice. Ian Rappaport and Mike Garofalo of NFL Network were the first two to report it, that Becton has an avulsion fracture on his right kneecap. It's the same knee that cost him the final 16 games of last season. Robert Saleh confirmed it in his post-practice press conference today, and most likely what this means is that Becton will miss the entire 2022 season. This comes right after he missed the entire 2021 season. He was injured the first week last year against Carolina, and it's almost unimaginable that he's going to play less snaps in 2022 than 2021, but sounds like barring some sort of miracle, that's what's going to happen. And there are so many different angles to this injury to discuss. I mean, the first thing I need to just say is how awful I feel for Mekhi Becton. Young guy with a bright future in front of him, suffered that injury last year and worked so hard to get back. And we talked about this just not that long ago, about the shape he got himself in. He dealt with so much grief from media. Some fans online were kind of, going at him. Really unfair, really stuff you don't like to see. He comes into camp in great shape, ready to have a great season after this long rehab process. And now he's got to do it all over again. And, there are questions about Becton's durability, of course. It's difficult to play in the NFL. Not everybody's body is built to take the pounding of an NFL season, especially on the offensive line. In fact, the human body is really not built to withstand it. But Becton, clearly having trouble staying on the field, and it's not his fault. You just feel awful for him. And at this point, I think you'd have to say that this really makes him having a successful career far less likely, from the standpoint it's another knee injury he's got to bounce back from, really another long rehab process, missing really two formative years in his career. It's just tough, and I send my best to Mekhi Becton, because the other stuff we're going to discuss today impacts the team, but it's a young guy who, again, had a bright future, had all the ability in the world, and just doesn't seem like he could stay healthy. It's just awful. It's heartbreaking stuff, in my opinion. But of course, there are on-field aspects, and this is a big loss for the Jets. Yesterday, I said don't panic. I'm still not saying panic, but this is a big loss. I mentioned that I was hopeful that it was not going to be a serious injury, because that's initially what Robert Saleh suggested. Now it is a serious injury. Becton, I'll reiterate what I said yesterday. If you were coming up with a list of players the Jets could least afford to lose, the quarterback's always going to be at the top of the list. Now, granted, Mike White came in and threw for 405 yards last year against the team that almost won the Super Bowl after Zach Wilson got hurt. But let's just say hypothetically it's Zach Wilson. Almost every team in the league, quarterback's the guy you can least afford to lose. So we take him out of the equation. When you talk about the expected performance, the guy who just 2 years ago was the top 11 pick, coming into camp again in great shape, really ready to have a great season off a long rehab process. you talk about the importance of the position, right tackle, premium position in today's NFL. And you talk about the lack of depth behind the starters. This is probably the player the Jets could least afford to lose, he and George Fant, because the Jets don't have any quality backups at the tackle position this year, at least as of right now. Last year, I would have said it was Carl Lawson. And of course, Lawson got hurt in training camp in a practice against Green Bay, a joint practice right before the second preseason game. And the Jets really had nobody behind him. The irony is that this year, the Jets probably would, not that you want it to happen because Carl Lawson's still a really important player, but this year with the other edge rushers the Jets have added, they actually would be in better position to weather an injury to Lawson. This year, the tackle position's the thin spot. And they had to go to this well anyway last year, but last year they were in a much better position to withstand an injury to Mekhi Becton because they signed Morgan Moses. And Morgan Moses, we've gone through it, kind of just fell into the Jets' lap where they had this extra cap space sitting around. Moses gets cut late in the offseason by Washington. Doesn't really have a lot of options because most teams have filled their voids. Most teams have spent their cap space, so he has to settle for a pretty cheap deal to be a backup tackle for the Jets. And Morgan Moses, in many ways, helped stabilize what could have become a very unstable situation. The Jets lack that stability this year with Becton. Now, this is a big loss. Now, in the past, I've gotten people very angry with me because there have been certain illnesses, certain injuries where I've just said the Jets season's over. They cannot withstand this. I've said the season's over, and people have gotten mad at me. I've been right some of the time. Sometime maybe I haven't been so right. I will say this. I do not think this ends the season for the Jets. I think the Jets can withstand this. I think the roster is better than it's been in years past. I've been pretty vocal about how much I think of Breece Hall. Breece Hall did not have a good offensive line last year at Iowa State. Big back. He can run with power. You still do have three strong run-blocking linemen on the interior. Laken Tomlinson, Elijah Vera-Tucker, Connor McGovern. I still think the team's going to be able to run the ball. We still are going to see a lot of two tight end sets this year. It hurts a lot, though. It really, there are lots of different angles where this hurts. First of all, is the Jets don't have anybody who can play right tackle right now. In fact, they're probably going to have to make an external move just because of how dismal things look right now. I mean, are you going to put Connor McDermott at right tackle for you? That's not going to work. Chuma Edoga played a little bit of practice today. He reportedly was so bad that he got benched from Max Mitchell. In fact, if you were trying to settle your nerves, and it's just practice, I always say, paraphrase Allen Iverson, we're talking about practice, man. But if you were looking to settle your nerves today, you got the exact opposite because all reports were the offensive line was a disaster in practice. Again, Edoga had to be benched. And, this goes back years. Edoga was a guy the Jets really needed to develop. If he wasn't going to be a starter, they at least needed him to develop into a quality backup. And it hasn't happened. So you got trouble at right tackle, but there are these other side issues that come into play. Because while I think the Jets are going to use two tight ends a lot, you're probably going to, whoever's playing right tackle now is probably going to need more help. So that means you're going to have to maybe keep a tackle and keep a tight end in more frequently. It'll happen. I mean, it was going to happen anyway, but now you have to do it a little bit more frequently. And that means there's one less receiver going out on pass routes. It makes the passing game less dynamic. Let me give you another thing that could come into play. Jets gave, everybody talks about this great season George Fant had last year, and I think Fant played well. George Fant got a lot of help last year. You're not going to be able to give Fant as much help because you're going to have to help the right side. So this makes George Fant worse. It just makes everybody worse. In fact, if you're talking about big picture for this team, you're always going to suffer injuries during the season. The NFL season is kind of like a war of attrition. Each subsequent injury hurts more than the last. And any injury the Jets suffer now on the offensive side of the ball is going to be compounded by the fact you're not going to have a right tackle who's going to be able to step up. The fact that your right tackle position is already weak makes any subsequent injury even more impactful. Last year, the defensive side of the ball, let me give you an example. I know these guys don't play the same position. I know they don't play the same roles, but Marcus May getting hurt in the middle of the point of last season was compounded by the fact Carl Lawson was already out of the lineup because you had issues at the back of the defense, but you did not have guys up front who could get to the quarterback and at least help you hide those issues. If a Mekhi Becton's still around and you suffer an injury elsewhere, you can maybe lean on Becton a little bit more. Now that's gone. It's a tough situation. I don't really know what the Jets are going to do at the tackle position, but ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll go through some of the possibilities. It's not so much what's a good idea, it might just be what's the least bad idea. We'll discuss as we continue on this Tuesday episode of Locked On Jets. Well, it certainly was a long day, and it's a hot day in New York in the Northeast. You've earned yourself a treat. Please go get yourself a Built Bar. After a tough day, it's something that can cheer you up. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market. These are delicious bars. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. And believe it or not, there's another new flavor. Built has done it again. This new flavor is cookie dough chunk puffs. They're light and chewy in texture. They have real cookie dough chunks. And yes, they are covered in 100% real chocolate. And they're only 160 calories with a whopping 15 grams of protein. These are delicious. If you're a cookie dough fan, you got to try them. I can't get enough of them. You're going to love it. So go to Built.com right now and use promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order, and that's good for cookie dough chunk puffs or any other type of Built bar. Again, it's promo code LOCKED15, one word with no space, LOCKED, number 1, number 5, for 15% off at BuiltBuilt.com. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or your first watch every day. The show's free and available on all platforms. On what's not a happy podcast, we have plenty of unhappy podcasts once we get into the season. August, this is the period where we should be excited. We should be optimistic. I think we've been excited. I think we've been optimistic to this point. But today's a tough day. You never want to suffer an injury in training camp. We get to these preseason games. First one for the Jets coming up Friday. And, we always talk about who's going to play well. It really, as much as you'd like to see the team play well in preseason, the key is just to avoid injuries. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to remember who played well, who played poorly in preseason. You're going to remember what happens in the regular season. And you'll remember it if you don't have a key player in the regular season because somebody got hurt in preseason. Same goes for training camp. As much as we hear these reports every day, who's up, who's down, as easy as it is to get, really fixated on it, it's important to avoid injuries. And unfortunately, the Jets got a reminder of that this week as Mekhi Becton suffered a knee injury. And it's odd because he was wearing a knee brace the end of last week, and Robert Saleh indicated there was some discomfort. I would really like the Jets to give some sort of explanation here. And the Jets claim that this was unrelated. I'd like to hear some explanation. But beside the point, Jets have to figure out what they're doing at the right tackle position right now. And there are not a lot of great options right now for this team. You look at the free agents who are available. The guy who's been most linked to the Jets is Dwayne Brown, former Texan, former Seahawk. Multi-time Pro Bowler, actually made a first-team All-Pro about a decade ago, a couple second-team All-Pros in his career, visited last weekend. And this is a key, he visited before the Becton injury, so he was talking to the Jets about a backup role. And he was a Pro Bowler last year. Well, I think the fact he was talking to the Jets about a backup role a couple weeks into training camp, still unsigned, shows you how legitimate that Pro Bowl berth was a year ago. He's approaching his late 30s. It's a tough spot, and he may have to. The Jets signed him. He's been a left tackle through his career. He may have to move to the right side, unless you're going to put him at left tackle and move George Fant to the right side, which to me would not make a lot of sense because, first of all, we just went through this, and the whole rationale for putting Fant on the left side was Saleh said he's more comfortable there. So you displaced this young, recent top 11 pick for George Fant because he's comfortable on the left. So now you're going to do it for a 37-year-old guy who you just signed. And beyond that, do we really want to get our left tackle, the starting left tackle, halfway through training camp and stick him in then? And this speaks to the trouble the Jets have right now because they don't have a quality backup on their roster ready to step in. So now you're going to have to, unless you're just going to go with Chuma Edoga or Max Mitchell or Connor McDermott, you have to bring somebody in, and this guy's not going to have good chemistry with the rest of the line. I mean, maybe this is just me being scarred by the Ryan Khalil experience 2 years ago. The Jets signed Ryan Khalil in training camp to play center, and fool that I am, I praised it at the time, and it was a disaster. He wasn't in playing shape. He wasn't ready to go. He had no chemistry. He did not understand the system. I don't know that you really want to import a guy like a Dwayne Brown right now for the same reason. It's going to be tough for him to develop chemistry on the line. It's a situation where he's not that familiar with the system the Jets are running. To me, I've said this in the past that I can't really get on Joe Douglas for the lack of depth on the offensive line from the standpoint that it's difficult to find depth, and you had to figure out the starters before that. He inherited a team that was a shell of a roster. The thing I will get on them for is that he's been talking with these veterans, and these guys, if you had a veteran you were bringing in for depth, he really should have been signed by the start of training camp. And I understand, there's reports Dwayne Brown has other teams who are interested in him. Maybe he hasn't wanted to sign. And of course, a veteran may just want to skip training camp altogether. That would not be unprecedented, but I think it's going to be really tough to just insert a guy in the middle of training. I've heard a couple other names thrown out there. I've heard Jason Peters, the 40-year-old, played last year with Chicago. Jason Peters is probably a Hall of Famer, but approaching 40. Still unsigned right now. He does have ties to Joe Douglas because he played with the Eagles for a long time. I don't know. He's a great fit. Darrell Williams, interesting. Former Panther, former Bill. He's still onside. Good player. I'm still trying to figure out what's going on with Darrell Williams. From the standpoint that the Jets haven't reached out to him, the standpoint he's still onside right now. Very good player. I'm not. That's a guy I could see going after, but you run into these difficult complications because you're putting a guy in. If you go the free agent route, halfway through training camp, probably not in football. I know, Dwayne Brown may be keeping himself in decent shape, but you got to get yourself into football shape. Being in good shape, physical shape, is different from being in good football shape. It's tough. So what's your other option? Well, your other option could be go with what you have internally. Well, that's not very good, is it? Adoga, Mitchell, McDermott. It's tough. I really am not entirely sure what the Jets do here. I mean, maybe you go with Mitchell, maybe you try and ride out the growing pains, and this is a kid with potential, but the challenge with that is 4th round pick. He may not be ready, and when you throw a guy into the fire before he's ready to go, sometimes he develops bad habits. I'm not sure that Max Mitchell being thrown in this year is the best thing for his development. Another option, maybe do you want to kick Elijah Vera Tucker out to tackle? Nate Herbig goes into guard. He's a guy the Jets claimed off waivers who has some starting experience. That might be I don't know, maybe that's the best option, but then you're messing with Vera Tucker's development. I mean, you've already moved him from left guard to right guard. Now you're kicking him outside for a year. And by the way, pretty much everybody in the draft, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say everybody, but the consensus for Vera Tucker seems to be that he was going to be much better fit at the guard position than he would be at tackle in the NFL. So I don't know that that's the greatest fit. And then you're really doing it for a single year. There are no good solutions right now. If you lack a player at a premium position at this time of the year, there really are no good solutions. You could say the Jets will search the waiver wire. Well, waiver wire is a guy who's not as good who wasn't good enough to make a roster. You could say you could sign one of these veterans. I've gone through the problems with that. Internally, there aren't any good options. So the criticism I'll have for Joe Douglas is not so much that they lack depth, because most teams lack depth and the Jets are still building. But if he was looking at these veterans anyway, he should have made a more concerted effort to get them under contract before week 1 of the season, because you look at the options right now, they're just not great. And speaking of options that are not great, I think we have to talk about Mekhi Becton's future. I think we have to talk about this season ahead. And that's what we'll do as we close out this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. Well, hindsight's always 20/20. It's true when you talk about roster decisions that leave you with a lack of tackle depth. And it's true in just your day-to-day life. You can't change the past, but what if you could get a little help from your future self? And maybe you'd like to ask to borrow a little cash. Now you can with Dave. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. And that's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, or catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hang-ups. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Tuesday. A difficult day for Jets fans as Mekhi Becton lost for the season, most likely another knee injury. It puts Becton in a really tough spot going forward. It puts the Jets in a tough spot going forward because now he's lost 2 full seasons, essentially. 2 critical developmental seasons for a guy whose technique needed some refinement. Just tough to go through rehab back-to-back years. I was thinking about this, and this doesn't apply so much to Becton because last year he was injured week 1. this year he's injured in training camp, but I think about guys who get injured the 16th or 17th game of the season, and there's this tendency we have to say, well, that's no big deal. The season's over. And we don't think about these guys have to spend months of their offseason in this grueling rehab. It's tough to do it back to back. Now, Becton's a different case because he's obviously missing time. The Jets are going to feel his impact loss, but the fact that he's got to go through another grueling rehab after everything he just went through, it's tough. And again, he's missing this key developmental time. And beyond that, you got to question whether his body can hold up. And I'm obviously not a doctor, but you look at the next season, I mean, the Jets almost are going to have to make a move at the tackle position. I think we're to the point after a guy misses 2 full seasons. How much can you count that Becton's going to be able to hold up for the whole season? I feel like heading into next year going forward, you almost have to have Becton as your backup swing tackle. Maybe he can get you through a couple games if you need to. But I've been saying it. This year was a key year for Becton. This was the type of year he had to show he could stay on the field. And unfortunately, and it's not his fault, and this is something I want to emphasize, you should be upset with the situation. You shouldn't be upset with Mekhi Becton. It's not a player's fault that he gets hurt, but it is a reality that some guys just have a tough time staying on the field. And seems like that's the case with Becton. But one final thing I want to reiterate, because obviously it's a tough day. Obviously it's easy to get upset. And obviously it's been a miserable, 11, 12 years to be a Jets, I guess 11 years to be a Jets fan. It's easy to lose optimism. It's easy to say, here we go again. After everything we've been through all these years, easy to look back on this and just say that this is a sign doom is to come this season. I do feel like this is a different Jets team. I feel like there's a lot of young talent on the team. I feel like they've done a solid job upgrading a lot of their holes this offseason. This is a challenge. This is, again, maybe the player the Jets could least afford to lose this season. And it's really tough because he's part of that young core. He's part of the player. He's one of the players the Jets, I think, have been counting on to develop into an impact player. And it leaves a big hole at an important position. But this does not mean the season's over. Every team's got to deal with injuries. You don't want it to be this guy, a guy this critical at this point of the year. You don't want it to be in training camp. You don't want it to be the right tackle position. You don't want it to be a spot where you lack depth. But every team has to go through injuries. Teams can overcome this. And the Jets, again, still do have a lot of young talent. I've told you in the past when I thought one injury was going to end the season. And I don't sugarcoat things. If you're new to the podcast, I don't sugarcoat things when things are heading towards the direction of doom. And I'm not sugarcoating it today. It's a big loss. It's one the Jets are going to have a tough time figuring out. But I do think they can figure it out. I do think there's actually enough talent on this team where they can figure it out. We'll see what happens. Maybe Joe Douglas has a rabbit in his hat. Maybe Dwayne Brown still has more in the tank than I thought he does. Maybe there's some move I'm not seeing. Who knows? Maybe Chuma Edoga develops. Maybe that's a little much too much to hope for. But we'll see what happens. I don't think, though, that I think this is a big loss. I don't think this completely decimates the season. I'm not ready to close the book yet on the 2022 Jets. So I wanted to end this on a little bit of a hopeful note because it's really difficult to come up with many positives from this situation. It's just an awful situation. It's awful for Becton. It's awful for the team. Just a tough day. And hopefully we'll have better days ahead. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Big shout out to subscribers to this podcast. And to join that group, here's what you got to do. Wherever you are listening or watching, hit the subscribe button. And if you do that, you'll receive notifications as new episodes are posted. You'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. It helps us out tremendously, helps other people find the podcast. So does giving this episode a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.